The Deepwater Horizon oil spill occurred on April 20th, 2010 in the Gulf of Mexico. Not a well-known fact, but the Deepwater Horizon, operated by the company Transocean, wasn't even there to recover oil from the Macondo site. Their job, instead, was only to dig the hole, get an idea of exactly how much oil was there, put a cap on it, and then move on to the next potential oil site where they would do the same thing next. At some point in time, maybe years in the future, British Petroleum, or BP, would come back to the Macondo site and begin the siphoning. Operating between $500 to $1 million a day, the Deepwater Horizon oil rig, because of the many problems and delays, the project was way overdue and getting extremely expensive. With only days to an expected completion, some critical last-minute tests, mostly to do with allowing the well cement to cure, were passed on, and a blowout occurred. This is where the oil pressure from 10,000 feet below overcomes the synthetic mud that holds the oil in place, and the extremely flammable oil shoots into the sky. Somewhere a spark ignited the oil, and the oil rig exploded, killing 11 workers, sinking the billion-dollar oil rig, and spilling oil into the Gulf of Mexico for 87 days. Some of the grim statistics. 134 million gallons of oil were spilled into the ocean, which killed an untold amount of sea life, polluted the beaches, and ruined the jobs of many people who depended on the ocean. The damage was so widespread that, quote, the impact can best be described as an injury to the entire ecosystem of the northern Gulf of Mexico. And the company that depended on this oil for their revenue ended up losing more than $20 billion in civil and criminal penalties. Let's take a look at the impact on the community. In terms of the economy, anyone who depended on fishing and tourism were now in survival mode. Not surprising in any way, the first 87 days were focused mostly on capping the leak, not on cleaning up the mess that was already made. Quoted in the Incident-Specific Preparedness Review of the U.S. Coast Guard, a year later, they noted, a contentious issue throughout the response involved the prioritization of the economic resources. Many thought environmental protection efforts were drawing limited resources that could be used to protect commercial interests. End quote. As for the environment, there was damage to the marine life, damage to the ecosystems, and a major concern for the public health. Socially, people, especially those that work in the commercial fisheries, were under a tremendous amount of stress because of loss of jobs and community displacement. There was also a great deal of unequal distribution of the spill's impact on vulnerable communities, not only in terms of some areas were more affected by others, but for those who didn't have much income in the first place, they had no backup resources to get back on their feet. Many people resort to selling scraps of metal for money or any other means to survive. Corporate responsibility became a real issue during this time. Before the spill, there was a 10-year high for the oil companies where increased technology helped exponentially expand their capacity to find new oil deposits around the world. Now these companies were on the news every day for months being analyzed under a microscope. Lastly, amongst the population, there was a deep scrutiny of the reimbursements from the $20 billion settlement where some people were unequally given more money than others. There were many changes, however, that made the oil industry a much more resilient part of our critical infrastructure. Regulations were strengthened. There was improved response frameworks in emergency response and planning. And there was an increased investments in technology and infrastructure to prevent something like this happening again. For lessons learned, involving the whole community was found to be extremely important, not only in helping them be able to respond better, but including them in emergency planning phases. After all, they live there. Oil is a global industry. The Deepwater Horizon oil rig was made in South Korea, floated across the Earth's 1,000 of miles around the Cape of Africa, and ended up in the Gulf of Mexico. And as such, international cooperation is extremely important. Lastly, ongoing adaptations need to be continually analyzed, criticized, and changed. Policies and practices must be solid, based on past history to maintain this critical energy infrastructure.